Hello and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Back to the live streams where we're looking at the mystery of August 16th, 1977. And we're going to be looking today at the second newspaper article that came out that Joyce, our fictional fan who lives in Memphis and is following this story and trying to figure out what happened to Elvis, and all she's got is the public reports, the radio, the television, the newspapers. And right now, it's the first morning. She heard that Elvis passed away the day before. It's now the morning of the 17th. These are the first newspaper articles that are coming out. We looked at the first one in the last video, and this time we're going to move on to the second. But before we do, we're going to take a look at Joyce's notebook, because Joyce has now gone through and decided that she needs to take a closer look at everything that's been said. So she took everything and broke it up into events. And then she's got the sources for those events, as you can see here on the screen. And then she's written into this chart everything that she knows and when it happened, so she can begin to make a timeline. Hey, Nancy, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. This one's really for you because you said that you wanted to see more episodes, so I wanted to get another one out here for you. So what we see here on the screen is that she's got the timeline. We're just going to go through it so that we're all on the same page with Joyce and we know exactly what's been said and what Joyce knows. And if you were an Elvis fan and it was 1977, the day after, this is what you would know. We know that at 6 a.m. on August the 16th, 1977, Elvis stopped playing racquetball and tells friends that he's going to go read. Now, this is a very condensed version of whatever Elvis did at 6 a.m., but it's coming from the Memphis police, which means somebody told the Memphis police that Elvis stopped playing racquetball about 6 a.m. and told whoever he was with that he was going to go read a book. And I'm just reading one of the comments that's coming in here. It's Nancy. I'm letting other people know about your channel. I let Billy and Danny know that you have a good channel. They would be interested in this. Thank you so much, Nancy. I appreciate that. The channel definitely needs everybody who wants to tell anybody about it, so we don't get too many viewers here. But I think that I'm getting out some information that a lot of people don't know. And I don't think anybody's really taken a really deep dive into all these articles that we're going to go through about what happened. So I hope that you find this interesting. So on August 16th, 1977 at 9 a.m., this is the last time that Elvis was verified alive. And Nancy's getting this from a Wire report, which means she saw it or heard it on the radio, but whoever said it, they're not saying, hey, I got it from a specific person, which means it probably came through on the Wire. So we're kind of guessing about that, but we don't know who really said this. It's definitely going around. Last time anybody saw him alive, 9 a.m., which makes that the earliest probable time of death. And that just kind of makes sense. And then the Shelby County medical examiner, Jerry Francisco, also said it was the earliest probable time of death. So most likely the Wire was quoting Jerry, but depending on exactly when it happened, maybe they made that guess on their own. But Nancy's just noted it in here twice. And of course, if you were making this, you would probably do that too, because there's a whole lot of information coming in and you got to note it as it comes in. So as we go down, let me get the right thing on the screen here. August 16th, 1977, 2:15 p.m. Earliest probable time the body was found. And that's coming from Dr. George Nicopolis. So they interviewed Dr. George. He got some quotes into the paper. I believe this was at the press conference that they gave. So he would have been there with Jerry, the Shelby County medical examiner that we just talked about. So they would have both heard what they said. Now, we're going to find out later that neither one of them kind of knew what the other one was going to say, because it was just such a chaotic event. And they just went out there and said what they said. Although it's all backed up by the the autopsy reports and stuff that they did. But the earliest probable time of death at 2:15, Dr. Nick's getting that from somebody who's told him. He doesn't have any medical evidence that it was at 2:15. There's nothing that points to 2:15. There's no CSI thing that says that. So that's Dr. Nick has said that, and it's made it into the papers. The next thing is 2:30 p.m., latest probable time of death, and that's from The Wire. And then Dr. Nikopoulos backs that up. So again, The Wire probably got that from the statement of Dr. Nick. And again, Dr. Nick wasn't there. So he's basing that on something that he's heard from somebody else, because again, there's no medical evidence as to exactly what time that Elvis passed away. And he's really basing his statement on the next one. Again, at 2:30 p.m., found by Joe Esposito unconscious in his night clothes. This was said by Joe Esposito on a television interview where he was very frazzled, and it was directly after I believe directly after the news conference that Dr. Nick and Jerry gave. Might have been before, but I think it was right after. And so they would have, Joe was still trying to deal with the fact that Elvis was dead, and he said that he found him unconscious in his night clothes, which would indicate that he was alive. But I think Joe was trying not to get into any details during that particular interview. The next one is 2:33 p.m. Memphis Fire Department ambulance from Engine House 29 at 2147 Elvis Presley Boulevard received and responded to a call. So that's the Memphis Fire Department that said that. So that's coming from their logs. So that's pretty accurate. 2:33 p.m., which means if Joe found him at 2:30 p.m., within 3 minutes, he was making a call. Now, if we go with the other thing that Dr. Nick said, 2:15 p.m., now we have 18 minutes before he made a call. Well, that is an issue. And we're going to see later that that time frame becomes very important to multiple conspiracy theories. But if we give Joe the benefit of the doubt to what he said when he was frazzled in that very first moment, 2:30 p.m. So here it is, 2:33 p.m., 3 minutes later, the call has come in and been logged at the fire department, and the engine is rolling out, or the ambulance is rolling out of the engine house. So then we've got to after 2:33 p.m., but before 2:56 p.m., Dr. Nikopoulos was performing cardiac pulmonary resuscitation when the ambulance arrived at Graceland. And this is from the Memphis Fire Department. So again, this is probably from a log, and it probably says something like Dr. Nick is performing the CPR, because this isn't exactly what happened. And Dr. Nick will tell us that at some point in the future. But Dr. Nick was not performing the CPR. That's what we will find out. He jumped into the ambulance and he took over. And once he was into the ambulance and he had taken over, he's now in charge. And that means that they can't stop working on Elvis until Dr. Nick stops working on Elvis. The hospital is not in charge. The ambulance is not in charge. The hospital is going to give Dr. Nick whatever he wants and whatever he needs to continue whatever services he is providing, but they don't get to make a call that they get to stop working because Dr. Nick is in charge and he's a doctor. And then at 2:56 p.m., a Memphis Fire Department ambulance arrives at Baptist Hospital with Elvis and Dr. Nick. So the call came in at 2:33 p.m., they made it to Graceland. They did whatever they did. They loaded Elvis into the ambulance. Dr. Nick jumps in. They drive to Baptist Hospital. All of that takes place in that time period, 2:33 to 2:56 p.m. Now, it takes about 10 minutes to get from Graceland to Baptist Hospital. And we looked at a video of it on a previous live stream. And it's kind of far away, 7 miles. So, it's close, but 10 minutes is a long time in an ambulance. And they might have been driving fast, and maybe they made it in 8, but that's got to be factored into this time period. So they worked pretty fast on Elvis. They saw that they needed to get him to the hospital. They put him onto the stretcher. They got him down into the ambulance and they took off. And 233 to 256, 7 miles seems pretty reasonable to me. So I don't think that as we go through and we see other conspiracy theories come in, that they really can mess with this time frame very much, because it's really locked down and it really seems like they were moving as fast as possible. At 3 p.m., that's the latest probable time of death, and that was listed by the Shelby County Medical Examiner, Jerry Francisco. So why did Jerry pick 3 p.m.? Well, they got to the hospital at 2:56, so it probably took them a couple of minutes to get him out and get him into the emergency room and stuff. And 3 p.m., a little wiggle room with the 256 is probably before 2:56. The hospital didn't kill him. That's really what Jerry is trying to tell everybody, is that, hey, nothing we could do. When he got here, he was already gone. Not our fault. We didn't do anything. We tried to bring him back along with Dr. Nick. We worked hard, but nobody could do anything because it was already done. And I'm sure that had a lot of legal and public facing kind of thoughts behind it, that he didn't want people to think that you show up at the hospital and you die, because here we have this very famous person that's done that. I don't think that probably stopped anybody from thinking that, but I believe that's why Jerry picked out 3 p.m. because, again, he has no medical evidence of exactly when Elvis passed away. But we do know that at 3:30 p.m., Elvis was pronounced dead. That was on the wire. And then at 3:30 p.m. also, same announcement that's coming from the Memphis Police Department. Almost assuredly, that's where the wire got it. The Memphis police came out and they said that Elvis had been pronounced dead at Baptist Hospital. The wire ran with it, and that's where the first news reports came from. And at 4 p.m., the death was announced to the public. So there would have been a little bit of news starting to run around between 3:30 and 4, and that's when everybody would have been asking, is it true? Is it true? Trying to call, trying to confirm, trying to do things. And then Baptist Hospital came out, 4 p.m., says the death is announced to the, this is it. That goes out on all the news services immediately because they were waiting, because they'd heard it at 3:30. Then that confirms it to everyone, and there is no hope left. And that's when people really start to go crazy and start to show up at Graceland, and that begins the whole process of the next several days. And I think that's, we've reached the end of the notebook and the timeline. So let me get that off the screen. We're going to go into these newspaper reports. Unfortunately, it's not visually super exciting because, what we've got to look at are basically these newspapers. But I have transcribed all the important stuff, and I'm trying to hit just the highlights for us. So let me run through that. Get myself into my notes here. And then Nancy's asking a question. What time are they actually saying he actually passed away? So they're given the time frame, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And that's really, it's figured from the thing that Joe said, or not that Joe, but that friends told the Memphis police, which we know those friends to be probably Billy and Joe Smith and Ginger Alden, that he was playing racquetball and he said at 6 a.m., hey, I'm going to go read a book. So that's when the friends left and he went upstairs. And we know that he went upstairs with Ginger. That hasn't really come out into any of this yet. But we do know Ginger was there because Vernon said in his interview the night before that Ginger was there. And then we're picking 3 p.m. because Jerry, the Shelby County Medical Examiner that's closely linked to the hospital, is saying not after he got to the hospital. He was gone before. So it's happened sometime between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. But nobody's narrowed it down. But there's been a whole lot that we've seen that says he had passed away at the time they had found him, which was 2:30 p.m. So it was some point before that. Vernon is very, very sure that it was some point before that. Joe is very, very sure that it was some point before that. And both of those gentlemen had their hands on him, and they knew Elvis. They were very familiar with him. So really, the truth is sometime between 9 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. But we're going to end up narrowing it down further, but that's what Joyce knows, and that's what we know right now. All right, let's take a look at this. This is the Memphis Press Scimitar. So it's the other big Memphis paper. Last time we looked at the other Memphis paper, the commercial, and it's escaping me right at the moment, but we looked at that one. And it had a lot of information that we had kind of seen before, but it was putting it in print. It was saying, yes, this is real. And that's kind of what this one's going to do. But the other one was fairly respectful to Elvis, and the commercial appeal. Yeah, it was very respectful to Elvis. This one, I don't think, even though it's the hometown paper, I don't know if this was meant to compete with the commercial appeal. Maybe they just take the other view or whatever. But the very first line is, Elvis Presley, the jiggling, jiving king of rock and roll, lived just 42 years, 7 months, and 8 days. So to me, to start out with jiggling and jiving, I don't know, that just doesn't seem like he's their hometown hero. Then it goes on and says, it was an exciting but frustrating life, which ended in Baptist Hospital, where Elvis was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. yesterday of a heart attack. He became more and more of a recluse in his last few years. Red West and other close friends, who used to be called the Memphis Mafia, were no longer with him. So that's a very odd paragraph, right? He became more and more of a recluse in the last few years. So I think that is where that's either reflecting something that's already started in the media, or it's kind of beginning this narrative that Elvis was this recluse. Now, if you know Elvis and you've studied his last few years, he wasn't a recluse. He did a whole lot. And even in the last few days, he went to a movie, and he went to the dentist that night, and he played racquetball with the friends. And he may have not left the property a whole lot in the presence of the public, but why would he? Because they'd follow him around. So he would, like when he went to the movies, some people went with him. The whole theater was full. They were all people who knew him and he had invited. But when he wanted a little bit more intimate, he would stay at his house, and then they would go to the racquetball courts, like he did that night, or he'd do something at Graceland. And when he wanted total privacy, he'd go up to his bedroom. But he wasn't by any means there all the time, because then it goes on and says Red West and other close friends. So these other close friends are the two guys who are writing the book with Red, Elvis, What Happened? And of course, that's Sonny West and Dave Hebler. That's the three people that are being referred. There aren't any other close friends that are being referred to in this sentence. And whoever wrote this is taking from Elvis, What Happened, because it's out, it's been published. First print run's gone through, and it's gone on sale a few days before. And so and of course in the press, you probably got it maybe a little bit early and got to read it, but he became more and more of a recluse in his last few years. That's a statement coming from that book. And it's the narrative of the book, right? And that's what we're seeing reflected here. And then it says, these people who used to be called the Memphis Mafia were no longer with him. So, and I don't know how close of friends they, at the point that they actually separated, I think it could be argued that they weren't close friends at all. That Red West and Elvis absolutely loved each other like brothers at some point. And that as their relationship got towards the end, it soured. I do believe they both still loved each other like brothers, but it became very bad. And of course, it ended. And then Red and the other two lashed out in anger put out the book, and now they give other reasons for doing the book, but they also agree, and they do say that there was anger involved in it, and they took their anger against their friend out into the public. And now he's passed away a few days after it came out, and others are taking their statements and using it to paint Elvis in a light that I don't think those three gentlemen intended for Elvis to be painted in, even though they wanted to complain about him to somebody and they wanted to say a lot of bad things. I don't think they had any idea that this would happen, but it's still their fault. You know, they're still to blame for that. So there's a lot of responsibility there. And then we go on to Elvis, already a living legend and somewhat of a folk hero to many, was found unconscious at Graceland at 2:30 p.m. yesterday. Maurice Elliott, Baptist Hospital vice president, said Joe Esposito, Presley's road manager and longtime friend, called an ambulance and tried to revive Elvis with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and heart massage until the ambulance arrived. Efforts to revive Presley continued in the ambulance and in the emergency room at Baptist Hospital. So I think what we've learned here is that Joe tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and heart massage. Now, Joe, I think, is going to come out later and say there wasn't any mouth-to-mouth. It was heart massage. And that I think there's confusion there because the words of CPR keep getting used. You know, all the words that make up that acronym keep getting used. And therefore, there's a thought that, you know, when we think about CPR, it means you start blowing into somebody's mouth. But that's not all of CPR. And Joe will later tell us that that wasn't possible, and that's why he didn't perform that part. Finally, according to Elliot, Dr. George Nicopolis, Elvis's personal physician, discontinued efforts and pronounced the singer dead at 3:30 p.m. Nicopolis indicated a heart attack, and this was shown to be correct by an autopsy. So Jerry, the Shelby County medical examiner, he says it was irregular heartbeat, right? And he has the specific name for it, the medical name, but it's irregular heartbeat. And Dr. Nick is saying heart attack. In the newspaper, it's basically telling us that heart attack, irregular heartbeat, that's all the same thing to the public. It's one side of a coin to the other. Your heart either stops beating or it beats the wrong way, and either one of them is basically an attack, and that leads to your death. So this was shown to be correct by the autopsy. And so basically the newspaper isn't making a big deal out of what Jerry said. Other people will, and that will continue to come up for years about the reason that Jerry assigned to it. Elvis's friends, who followed the ambulance to the hospital, were overcome with grief and kept expressing hope that the king was not dead. Many nurses and others in the hospital had tears in their eyes when word spread that Elvis was really dead. So I think that's a nice piece that just indicates that everybody that was there felt this. And this wasn't something that just happened and everybody was in the hospital was surprised. Elvis was wheeled in. It spread like wildfire through the hospital. Every single person in that hospital knew that Elvis was there, and they were waiting to find out what happened, and then he didn't make it. So we're going to go on. That was one of the articles that was in this newspaper. And they had another article, and this one I do have a little bit of visuals for, so let me pull those out. So Elvis has passed away, and well, hey, let me take a look at the chat here. I see I got another. So Nancy's asking, now David Stanley said he gave Elvis Presley his 3 doses of medicine that night, but what was the last time he did it? So we haven't heard a thing about any of this medicine yet. That has not come into the public sphere. Joyce does not know anything about that yet. It is going to come up. We are going to see this. We're going to get into these doses. I saw something the other day that gave the timeline for when the doses came out, but they pumped his stomach, and they did not indicate, I don't think, and again, this hasn't come out, and that's why I don't have it on the top of my mind, but I'm kind of thinking that it comes out that they had dumped the stomach contents and they didn't do an inventory of them. So it's not really clear if he had actually taken those doses. And then there were all these stories that the doses had been monkeyed with and that they were actually placebos. The guys say over and over that they did things to make these placebos, which makes you have to wonder, were they placebos that night or were they not placebos? But what I do know is that the drug test will eventually come back and say that everything in his system was at therapeutic level. Now, if there was stuff in his stomach that hadn't been digested fully yet, maybe that would have pushed him over the therapeutic level, but the stuff in your stomach tends to digest at a fairly slow rate. So maybe, and they intended to do that. So, and if he was taking it as intended. Now, the other weird thing here is that he's taking these sleep medications, but what Dr. Nikopoulos said is he's taking drugs in order to suppress his appetite. Well, you're not taking 3 sets of drugs at night to suppress your appetite. So that doesn't line up either. So right now, we've got a lot more questions than we've got answers. But you're right, Nancy, and I'm going to get that into the notebook as a question so that we know when it comes up, and as we're moving into it and we see it start to pop up, that we'll be able to answer that. So we have celebrity tributes that are rolling in for Elvis at this point. The whole world is shocked that he's gone. They can't believe it. And one of the first ones is Frank Sinatra. So Frank Sinatra, so I'm just looking, Nancy's replying, yeah, when I drove back from the dentist, you could see him, he was coherent, he looked fine. Yeah, he did, he looked fine. And whatever he was taking in those packets, it was supposed to help him sleep. And he apparently really wanted to sleep. So I would think it's just for sleep. But and it was coming from Tish, right? His personal nurse, who has not entered the story yet. Joyce doesn't know Tish lives on the premises. She doesn't know he has a personal nurse there. She doesn't know anything about these aides. She doesn't know about David or Ricky Stanley. She may know that they're his brothers, but she doesn't know that they were there that night. So this is all coming. Yeah, I got it. Nancy says, I meant Elvis. Absolutely, I understood. And thanks for the participation. I appreciate it to know that people are listening and they're getting something out of this. So Frank Sinatra dedicated part of his performance at the Alpine Valley Music Theater in East Troy, Wisconsin to Elvis, saying, "We lost a good friend today." I think that's significant because Frank had a show to put on. He was a performer and he couldn't stop the show and he couldn't not do it. People had paid for the tickets. And like Elvis, people depended on Frank for a living. So Frank went out there, but he didn't let it pass. He made a statement. He knew Elvis personally. He had done a lot of things with Elvis. And I got a comment coming in from Cassandra. Ricky Stanley gave Elvis his medication envelope packets that day. I believe that's true, Cassandra, and that's going to show up. But I think it's also true that David tells a lot of stories about the packets, and that confuses people about who actually gave the packets. Nope, Nancy's saying it was David. So it might have been David, but my recollection is David wasn't that Ricky was on shift for part of it, and David had taken a friend somewhere and stuff, but there's a lot of stories about it. We're going to get into it. But it's good to see that we've already got people that, there are answers out there, and we want these answers, and we're going to nail them down, and we're going to put them on this timeline that we just looked at so that we always know. And I'm going to make this timeline available. It's not really got enough stuff in it now to be useful for anything, but when we get through a few more of these episodes, I'll make it available for you to download. You can start making your own notes into it if you want, and I'll continue to update it and make it available for download. And even after the series is over, we'll always be able to go back to this timeline and say, hey, we went through every piece of source material and we put it all in order, and we made a decision about who was telling the truth and who wasn't, and we weighted that more than the others, and here's what it looks like is the truth. We've got another celebrity statement. It's from Pat Boone. And Pat Boone was a true friend of Elvis's, really looked up to him, and they had a special bond. Pat was very strongly Christian, and Elvis, I believe, truly respected that. And this picture right here is actually Pat on a Christian program spreading the word of Christ in this particular picture. But it is in 1977. So I'm trying to get all of the pictures that we look at to be from 1977 so that we just understand what these people looked like when Elvis passed away. And Nancy's saying that I'm curious, or did they both lie? And I like to know why they lied. That's very curious. I'm very curious. Well, I believe they were both doing things that if Elvis had caught him doing it, he wouldn't have been especially happy with. Not especially bad, terrible things, but I kind of believe some of it had to do with doing drugs and getting high and things that Elvis wouldn't approved of and not being around when they were supposed to be. And it kind of like employees that would come in and clock in and then go back home and then come back later and clock out. You know, that's the feeling that I have. I'm not saying that's what they did, but I do believe David had left the premises at some point, and he unfortunately publishes multiple accounts of that. And that's how, you know, David is probably one of the worst abusers of the publications. It becomes very clear what he's saying is not exactly accurate, or not accurate at all, or not the truth. He loses all credibility. So as people do that and they continue to give stories that change, they destroy their credibility. But people who give the same story over and over will be able to say, hey, that person's story never changes. It's always the same. And there are people who are telling stories that are always the same. And they are very overshadowed by the ones that change their story, because the ones that change, they pull in more views. And it's always been about views, even before YouTube. People want the ratings. They need to sell the papers. It's all about the money. So that's just part of it. Let's see. So what did Pat Boone say? He said, there's no way to measure the impact he made on society or the void that he leaves. He will always be the king of rock and roll. He was my friend, and I'll miss him. So Pat Boone gave a very moving tribute, I believe, to Elvis Presley. And Nancy says, I'll be honest, what I'm curious is they didn't want to be bothered with Elvis. Didn't one of them put something in there that was strong, and Elvis didn't know. Wow, you know, that's a much more involved question, but I think what we can say to that is Jerry Francisco, who is a man who did a lot. I mean, he did probably thousands of autopsies, at least hundreds, and probably thousands. And most of those would have been for people who passed away in odd circumstances. And I would say that would skew heavily towards people who had been, you know, killed by others, and some of that would have been poisoning. So he probably had a healthy experience with poisoning and being able to see the signs of it. So the fact that he dumped the stomach contents without really going through them or noting them, although I'm saying that, I don't know that for sure. We need to find that out for sure. But I know they dumped the contents, but I don't think they inventoried them. That would indicate that he did not believe that there was poison involved. So he would not have seen any of the other symptoms. Now, does that mean that they couldn't have found some super poison that nobody would have noticed? No, obviously not. I mean, and that kind of thinking it goes all the way back in history. So if you go back to like Augustus Caesar and how he passed away, people believe his wife poisoned him. But if you understand the relationship between Augustus and his wife, that is highly unlikely that she poisoned. Now, did somebody else poison him? Maybe, but it's not even clear that he was poisoned. So the thoughts of poisoning, that's very interesting, and it aligns with a lot of historical thought about a lot of different deaths that we know of, not just Elvis. So definitely we'll keep that in mind, and I'll write that into the notebook too. Was he poisoned? We don't think so, because Jerry says, no, it was natural causes. And Cassandra's saying, I saw a vintage interview with Ricky Stanley, and he said he gave Elvis the medication packets that day. Absolutely, Cassandra. I saw that. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm thinking of books that David had written where I think he gave a timeline of when he gave the packets, but he may have been referring to other days, like because they were running, they would have covered these shifts. And there was something about them changing shifts that day, which I think was kind of a story about how nobody was on shift, but I don't really know, and we haven't got there. But definitely this is one of the reasons I'm doing this series, is that David's told so many stories that we got to get to the bottom of it. Now, who's the next person that's going to come in here for our celebrity tribute is Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys. And what he said is his music was the only thing exclusively ours. He wasn't my mom and dad's music. His voice was a total miracle, a true miracle in the music business. It had an influence on the entire group. So this Carl was a famous man. He wrote a lot of songs. Everybody knows the Beach Boys. A lot of albums out there. Group lasted. It lasted longer than the Beatles, really. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was as impactful as the Beatles, but it was right up there and tied into all kinds of pop culture things. Like Charlie Manson was friends with one of the Beatles, or with one of the Beach Boys. So a lot of tie-ins here. And he, like John Lennon, is saying that I wouldn't be in this business. I wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't have this music. It wouldn't have come to me if I hadn't been able to hear and be influenced by Elvis. And that's the impact that he had. And Nancy's saying, yeah, I'm curious because I heard Ricky Stanley say he was out getting high and he stopped and had breakfast and he walked in and it was chaos, and I'm curious why the lies. Right, I heard that one too. So how could he even give him the medications if he's out getting high and having breakfast and stuff? So the whole thing doesn't make any sense, right? Even what, I don't think Tish gave them to him, because I don't remember her saying that, but we'll get in. And that even makes you wonder if they've given all these stories and they end up, maybe they didn't give him any packets. Maybe there weren't. Maybe he did take packets like this, but this particular night, because he went to bed late and he was there with Ginger, and then he went into the bedroom or the bathroom to read. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense that he would have been taking that many packets, but maybe he did, and they would have all had to have been taken between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m., right? Because he died at 9 a.m. at the very, very earliest, because that's when he was last seen. We'll find out later. That's, I believe, Ginger saying that's the last moment she saw him. So that's only, and if he went to the bedroom at 6 a.m., it's only a 3-hour period. And my recollection on the amount of time that Tish would want between the packets was longer than 3 hours between all 3 packets. They were supposed to last like all night or something. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it's just too many stories. Luckily, Joyce doesn't know that yet, and it's not that confusing. So she's got a slightly clearer view of it at this moment, but it will become confusing. And then they'd say maybe they got the wrong night because they were so high all the time. And I don't think that they got the wrong night. I think they may have used details of other nights, but that they were trying to, they were telling stories for a reason. There was a purpose to the lies. Later, the purpose becomes to be able to retell the events and therefore earn money from them. To retell them over and over and try to make them be fresh. But at the early onset here, I think a lot of it is just they can't keep up with their own lies, right? And they keep getting caught in them. David's not a good liar. He's just a liar. All for entertainment purposes. Let me get this out here. This channel is only run by a fan. I'm just sitting in my private studio at home, giving my own opinions. Everything that I say is for entertainment purposes only. I don't really know anything. I'm just a fan. I'm not an expert. I've read some books and I've looked at some other material, and as you see, we're going through the source material right here in front of everybody so that everyone sees what it is. I'm not hiding anything from anybody, and then I'm just giving my interpretation of it. And who is our next celebrity? And you have to say things like that on YouTube now because there's some drama. And this is not a drama channel. So hopefully there will not be drama here. And I know that I've got at least one person that's watching that appreciates a non-drama channel. So our next famous person who gives a tribute to Elvis is Cher. And everybody, like Elvis, she's only got one name, right? Cher. Once you say it, everybody knows who she is. And she says that the first concert I ever attended was an Elvis Presley concert when I was 11 years old. Even at that age, he made me realize the tremendous effect a performer could have on an audience. So the very first concert that a person who has given, it's got to be hundreds of concerts, right? She may have even given thousands of shows, or over 1,000, a lot. Very first one she ever saw was Elvis Presley, and kind of told her what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. Made her realize that she could have an effect on people, that she could have an audience, and she's had one ever since. And who's our next famous person, our next celebrity who wanted to give a tribute to Elvis? It's Hank Snow. And Hank Snow is the guy who the Colonel used to manage. And he never had a bad thing to say about the Colonel. He and the Colonel split. They had their differences privately, but Hank was a professional. And the Colonel was a professional. Colonel never said anything bad about Hank. Hank never said anything bad about the Colonel. In fact, Hank said some very complimentary things about the Colonel long after they had split up. Hank felt that the Colonel really did a lot of good things for his career. He just thought that he got to a certain point that he could make better decisions. He would do it on his own. And nothing wrong with that, right? And I think it might have hurt the Colonel's feelings a little bit, but he went on to do other things. Then he had to get a hold of Elvis, right? So, and Hank, he knew Elvis personally. They were friends. Hank was an older gentleman. He would have been a mentor to Elvis. He would have been someone that Elvis looked up to, that Elvis respected greatly, that Elvis's parents respected greatly, and Elvis would have enjoyed his music. He would have liked listening to him. And Hank said, I think if anybody deserved to be called a legend and a superstar, it would be Elvis. He was very versatile. He covered the pop field, the middle of the road field, the blues, and of course, earned the title, the King of Rock and Roll. So Hank, a consummate professional, a man who has spent his whole life performing on stage, who knew Elvis personally, is saying that as a professional, Elvis was the top. And even Hank himself, I think, would admit that he could not have been as versatile as Elvis. He could not cover the pop field. He wasn't really a middle-of-the-road guy. He was a country guy. He sang country, and that's what he did, and that's what he liked. But Elvis came in, and he did everything, and he did it so well. So we've got another celebrity interview, and this one's a little bit less of a celebrity, but as an Elvis fan, everyone should know her. This is Mae Axton, and she wrote Elvis's first giant RCA hit in 1956, Heartbreak Hotel. And she wrote it before Elvis was with RCA, and she had shown it to him. It's a great story. And she believed in Elvis. She really, truly believed in Elvis. And Elvis respected her and loved her like he loved a lot of the older, mature women in his life, like Marion Keisker, his own aunts and relatives, people who had done things for him, women who had done things for him. Elvis had a special relationship with all women and loved women. And Mae thought so much of him that she wrote this song especially for him, and it made him a superstar. Everybody in the country knew his name because of the song, not just because of his talent. The songs that he had already done for Sun, they just weren't, it's not that they weren't popular or weren't great, they weren't out there. The Sun just didn't have the pressing capability to push the records out, and if you couldn't push the records out, the radio stations didn't want to play you. There wasn't any point in it. So May, along with the Colonel, put Elvis on the map immediately with Heartbreak Hotel. And she said, I think Elvis Presley, even in death, is still the king of pop, rock and roll, and country. He was always one of the sweetest things in the world. And that's because she just thought so much of him. So maybe one day I'll do some stories about May. She was a very special person. And our next celebrity is Anne Margaret. And what she said is, not only was Elvis a legend in his own time, but his unique talents will be even more appreciated in years to come. So Anne, who we all know Anne's relationship with Elvis, we don't even really need to go into that. It's possible they were the loves of each other's life, the ones that they didn't get, they each let each other go, and maybe that was for the best. It's possible they could have burned each other up, that they could have had something like a Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton kind of connection, or maybe it would have been the best thing of both of their lives. No one will ever know because they did not choose to move forward with that. I believe they let the public get in the way, and I think Elvis had some fear about it. I think he had more fear than Anne did. But however it went, they did not end up together. But they did have a special appreciation for each other for their entire lives. And here Anne says that he will be more appreciated in years to come. And it turns out she was 100% right. It's like she saw the future, because that is exactly what happened. And if you see Anne today, she's still incredibly beautiful. And our next celebrity, not quite a celebrity, was the President of the United States himself, Jimmy Carter. And he made a national announcement that Elvis Presley's death deprives our country of a part of itself. His music and his personality, fusing the styles of white country and black rhythm and blues, permanently changed the face of American popular culture. His following was immense, and he was a symbol to the people the world over of the vitality, rebelliousness, and good humor of this country. So Jimmy saying that Elvis was a good American, that it was good for America to have Elvis, and that he represented what it truly was to be an American. That's high praise coming from a sitting president. Jimmy Carter was president while he said this. So he was the head of state, head of the country, and he grieved for Elvis. And then we have a quote from a man named Jackson Baker. And Jackson was not a celebrity. He was 37 years old. He was an assistant professor of English at Memphis State University. And he recalled when, for a few months in 1955, he and Presley's family were next door neighbors on Lamar Avenue. And he said it was strange. He had 2 or 3 Cadillacs out front and no telephone. Baker said the first time he met the up-and-coming singer was when he came to use the telephone. He just said, "Hi, I'm Elvis Presley." And I said, "Hi, I'm Jackson Baker." So I did not get a picture of the Lamar Avenue house. I should have. If you've ever seen it lately, for a lot of the last few years, It was painted with a Mickey Mouse on it because it was like a daycare center, and then it burned. I'm pretty sure that's the one. And next door to it was another house, and that's the house that Baker lived in. And I believe this house, so I might have the timeline slightly mixed up here, but Elvis lived in a house on Alabama Avenue. And if you've watched any of my videos on the channel, I have some about the Alabama house, and they lived with some Jewish neighbors who lived upstairs, a family that lived up there, and they did not have a telephone. The Jewish family had a telephone, and it was upstairs. And when they wanted to make a call, they went upstairs, and the Jewish family let them use the phone. And people would call that phone for them. So that was the phone. The Presleys did not pay for a phone. Now I'm sure that they worked some money out or something with the Jewish family, but most of the stories indicate that the Jewish family loaned money to Elvis's family, and then it would be paid back. So they were struggling even after Elvis hit it big, in the sense that people knew who he was and his recordings were in demand. Kind of the problem, though, is that there weren't any recordings to be bought because it took Sam a while to get the recordings out there. And then after Sam had cash flow issues that meant Elvis wasn't always getting paid properly. And Elvis stuck with him because Elvis was loyal, and he understood money problems. And he understood that if they could get past these money problems, there would be more money and everybody would be okay. So that's the important part of Elvis's early journey, is that he stuck with Sam, even though Sam was not living up to his agreement monetarily, and not by a little bit, by a lot. Sam was not living up to that agreement. But they didn't have a phone. So they moved from this Alabama house and they go to this Lamar house, and they don't get a phone because that's just an added expense. And the Baker's family has a phone, and Vernon asked to use it, and they say, yeah. And then I believe Baker's father tells a story, which isn't here, and I don't have directly in front of me, but maybe we'll find it and go through it in more detail one day. But I'm pretty sure he tells a story about it was hot, and they'd leave the screen doors. You leave your door open, you just have your screen door, and it bang, you close, open and close. Vernon came through and started using the phone. And it got to the point where Vernon wasn't knocking anymore. He just come in and used the phone. So the father had to put like a hook on the screen door so that somebody had to unhook it in order to let Vernon in, and that way Vernon couldn't just walk into the house. And I just thought that was hilarious. And I'm pretty sure that story is told on the Spa Guys channel, where he actually goes to that house and they look at what it looks like now, what's left of it. And that's a really important video because I'm fairly certain the house burned after that, and it might be completely gone by now. I know somebody bought it and was trying to do something with it, but things move fast out there in Memphis, and I don't know if it's still there or not. But that was what Jackson Baker had to say. He actually knew Elvis. He had met him, knew him for a few months. Now, the reason it's only a few months is they move on from the Lamar house, and they move to another house, and then they move somewhere else, and they eventually move to Audubon, and then they move on to Graceland. But they lived a lot of places, and I have tracked a lot of those down, and I have them in an address book that I've created to try to keep track of a lot of these. So maybe someday we'll walk through that too. That could be a lot of fun. But right now we're still trying to solve this mystery of August 16th. But we've reached the end of what I really have for today, because we've been on for very close to an hour. So just read the last few comments that are out here. And if anybody wants to ask me anything or put any comments in, I do see that we have at least a few people that are watching. I'd really love to talk to you guys and answer whatever any questions you have. But Nancy says, can you imagine Elvis Presley was so fun that he would have 6 or 7 of them, and with the cell phones? Yeah, like if he was here today and he'd have thousands of those cell phones, right? And he'd probably be talking on everyone, and somebody else be answering though, right? Because you have to give up those numbers pretty fast. Can't let him get out. That was the thing about Elvis. He liked to switch his phone number a lot because people get a hold of it. And there were certain people he had on a list. And when his number changed, somebody would call, one of the Memphis Mafia would call them and say, hey, phone number changed. And so I'm thinking Mary Ann Mobley tells a story about that even though she hadn't talked to Elvis in a long time, somebody called and said, and it was either Charlie or Joe, and said, hey, Elvis's phone number changed. She wanted you to have the new one. That meant you could call Elvis directly. And that's really it for today. And I don't see that anybody else has got any questions or anything, but I do appreciate that everybody that joins, everybody that watches even for a few minutes, everybody that comments, everybody that watches later and comments, anybody that watches any of my videos or shorts or goes to the posts that I put out and has any interaction, definitely helps the channel. Channel's very small. And so what that means is YouTube thinks that nobody wants to see any of the information that I have. So they don't really push me out. They call that impressions. And so what it means is, even though I'm on YouTube, when people turn their YouTube on, I'm not going to show up as a suggestion. You'd have to go track me down. And of course, as small as the channel is, nobody's heard about it. It's not tracking anything down. And it is growing. It's growing steadily. It's growing all the time. It's getting a lot bigger. But I think that there are just so many Elvis fans out there that would think that these stories are great. And I'm doing what I can to get them out there to them by posting them up here. But only you, the ones who actually love them, can tell those that you know would love them to give them a chance. And that's it for me. I'm going to sign on out and tell everybody once again, keep on taking care of